Crown of Thorns and Desire. Previous episodes are available on playlist. A link is given in the video description. Episode 2. Breakfast. She was forcibly pushed out of bed, and without clothes, she could only hold her hands over her chest. The two maids seemed to uncover some secret, peeling back the layers of blankets and stripping off the pillowcases and duvet covers. After doing all this, the two maids carried everything that needed washing out with the sheets, chatting and laughing as they went down the stairs, their voices loud as if deliberately meant for Enhanyi to hear. How could the general take a liking to her? Who knows? Will she stay here? We have to serve a yellow-skinned person from an inferior race. She shouldn't last more than a few days. Haha, yes. Bang 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 bang. The bathroom door was about to be knocked down. Enhanyi opened the door to see the plump woman glaring at her angrily. What are you dawdling for? Quickly put on this dress. The general requests that you come downstairs for breakfast immediately. With that, she threw a silk nightgown onto Enhanyi. Enhanyi looked at her coldly. They all said please, but this word held no respect whatsoever. I'm not hungry, I don't want to eat. Don't make me say it a second time, it's the general who wants you downstairs. His intention was to have her accompany him for breakfast. Enhanyi slipped on the lace light blue nightgown. Her ankle sprain had not fully healed, and going down the stairs still caused a dull pain. She paused at the turn of the staircase on the second floor and saw him sitting at the dining chair with his legs crossed, reading a newspaper. The radio was broadcasting the news, and he lifted a cup of warm coffee to his lips, taking a sip. Good morning. He raised his coffee cup to her, his sapphire blue eyes sparkling. He was not wearing that black uniform, just a white shirt and suspenders, looking very handsome, with the buttons of his shirt only half fastened, revealing his firm chest. This despicable, shameless pervert. Enhanyi cursed inwardly as the plump woman shoved her shoulder. She went down the stairs and was pushed into the dining chair beside him, sitting stiffly with no expression on her face. I thought you must be hungry, so please come down and have breakfast with me. He put down the newspaper and signaled the servant to turn off the radio. Let's begin. The servant lifted the iron lids off the dishes one by one. The food was abundant: long loaves of black bread, frosted donuts, creamy pastries, drinks of milk, coffee, juice, as well as ham and sausages, and some other fruits. He lowered his head, elegantly cutting the ham on his plate with a knife, seemingly engaging in friendly small talk. What do you usually eat for breakfast in your country? With years of war, the people are suffering, the poor can't even afford to eat. Enhanyi shot him a glance, but her taste and senses were slowly returning. She pressed her lips tightly together, her stomach gradually awakening from numbness to hunger. He stuffed the ham into his mouth and took a piece of bread. This world is the same everywhere, but you should be a girl from a middle-class background. She did not respond to his pretentious concern and questions. She had long made it clear that she was a Red Cross nurse. Even if she said it 1,000 times, he would not react. Besides, did her background matter? She was now merely his prey, his slave. What's wrong? Not to your taste. Seeing her sitting still, he tilted his head slightly, smiling as he asked. And Hanyi still did not answer. In fact, she was already starving, her front pressed against her back. In the sea camp, the only food was hard bread that felt like stone and cold water. After being electrocuted by Margaret, she had been unconscious and unable to eat. The nutrient solution could only sustain her life, not alleviate her hunger at all. Now, the aroma of food was drilling into her nostrils. She was desperately resisting the temptation of that aroma when a voice reporting something came from outside the door. The maid went to open the door, and a serious-looking officer walked into the dining room, going straight to his side and whispering a few words in his ear. He lowered his gaze, his eyes blinking slightly, and ordered, "Prepare to leave immediately." "Yes." The officer stood at attention. He turned his ice blue eyes toward her. "Sorry, I have to go out. Enjoy your meal." With that, he wiped his crimson lips with a napkin, quickly left the dining table, and walked to the door, putting on his coat and hat next to the cloakroom, surrounded by several SS officers as he burst out the door. As soon as he left, she could not care about the maid's disdainful looks any longer and immediately began to wolf down the food on the table. She was truly starving. She had no time to consider why he had left breakfast unfinished or what despicable business he was rushing off to. Her primary concern was to fill her own stomach. Courage. For several days, she had not been disturbed by him, as he was out for days at a time. And Hanyi discovered that the entrance to the villa was heavily guarded, with soldiers patrolling the front yard at all times. Clearly, her movement was restricted to within this house. Moreover, the slightly plump maid, Abigail, always followed closely behind her. "Miss, where are you going?" Abigail's tone had grown somewhat impatient. "If you have nothing to do, please return to your own room." "You can do nothing, but we still have a lot of work to do." "I just want to look around, you can go about your business." Abigail shot her a fierce glare and reluctantly followed her. And Hanyi arrived at a door opposite the first-floor hall. "What is that room for?" Evidently, from the structure of the entire house, this room faced the backyard. "That's the study." And Hanyi pushed open the solid wooden door, and the sight before her was somewhat disappointing. Although the large study had many windows, each one was quite high, and all were covered with thick iron grills. Suddenly, her eyes brightened. There was a piano in the study. The piano's surface was covered with red velvet cloth, and the stand and stool were polished clean. She lifted the velvet cloth covering the piano, and it was clear that this piano had seen better days. The keys were no longer pure white but slightly yellowed. She raised her wrist and found a few notes with her right hand on the piano keys. The sound was rich, and the tuning was good. She sat on the piano stool, her hands gently resting on the keys. It had been a long time since she last played, and her ankle sprain had not fully healed, causing some pain when she pressed down, but it did not hinder her from producing harmonious melodies. The sound of the piano filled the study, and a look of disbelief appeared on Abigail's face. Several servants tidying up on the second floor paused their work, and even the soldiers patrolling the yard stopped in their tracks, all captivated by the beautiful music. After finishing a piece, she closed the piano lid. "My angel, you play beautifully." As the last note faded, his ghostly voice immediately rang out. Startled, she turned around sharply, having been so absorbed in playing that she hadn't noticed he was standing right behind her. He was still dressed in a black trench coat, the belt tightly cinched, his long boots slightly muddy, and he held his military cap in his hand as he approached her step by step, a smile playing on his lips. His hands rested on her shoulders, his hot breath brushing against her cheek. A delicate Western girl can interpret such a tempestuous piece so perfectly. Although she felt uncomfortable being restrained by his hands, she knew she could not blindly resist, sitting stiffly on the stool. "But do not attempt to escape, the guards of this house are very diligent." "My angel, please forgive me for discerning your intentions from the music just now." Her dark eyes widened. Her piano playing had inadvertently revealed her inner secrets. The humiliation and abuse she had suffered recently had all been vented through her music, and he must have heard the underlying meaning, fearing it would provoke a mad retaliation. He patted her shoulder. "Go call Abigail to prepare dinner, I need to take a shower." With that, he left the study and ascended the stairs. Enhanyi stared at his figure disappearing up the spiral staircase, and from his tone, it seemed she was his servant. However, she decided to be pragmatic. When she reached the kitchen in the basement, she found Abigail and a small male chef already preparing dinner. The maid Abigail, usually indifferent, was joking with the chef, who sported a pair of small mustaches. Her arrival was clearly abrupt and unwelcome. Abigail placed 2 potatoes on the cutting board. "Miss Gianna, what do you need?" "Your general requests you to prepare dinner." After saying this, Enhanyi immediately turned to leave. "Miss Gianna, please take this dinner to the general's bedroom." Maid Abigail placed a metal tray with both hands in front of her. "What? You want me to deliver it?" Enhanyi exclaimed, shocked that this maid would ask her to serve him. She was about to refuse when Abigail added, "But, this is the general's order." Abigail glared at her with lifeless eyes. "You better go right away, if it takes too long, the general will blame us for the coffee not being hot." Enhanyi carried the tray and walked to the door of his bedroom on the second floor. She knocked on the door with her fist, but there was no response from inside. Gathering her courage, she pushed the door open and walked in. She had expected his room to be filled with strange items, but to her surprise, the decor was quite simple. Aside from being twice the size of the guest room in the attic, there was hardly any difference. Retreating. The curtains were half drawn, and the evening sun streamed in through the high window. He had apparently just finished a hot shower, sitting in a lounge chair by the window. His golden hair was still slightly damp, and he wore a white nightgown, the collar of which was unbuttoned low, revealing the golden hair on his chest, shimmering in the sunlight. "Come here," he said to her, who stood frozen at the door. "Androgynous." She rolled her eyes, silently repeating this phrase in her mind, as it was the only way to muster the courage to approach him, holding the tray. She placed the tray in front of him on the small tea table and turned to leave. "Did I let you go?" As expected, he called her back. She froze in place, unsure of what to do. He rose from the lounge chair and unfastened the belt of his nightgown in front of her. Enhanyi instinctively closed her eyes, wondering if this androgynous man had exhibitionist tendencies. He merely tightened the belt around his waist, and her tension made him chuckle inwardly. "Don't worry, darling, I would love to eat you, but right now, I want dinner more." He opened the metal lid and glanced at the fragrant steak. "Thank you for bringing me dinner, now you can leave." Was he really letting her go? She found it hard to believe, opening her eyes to see him eagerly picking up a spoon and finishing the potato soup like a hungry wolf, focused solely on the food before him, letting her go. A glimmer of hope filled her heart, and she immediately turned to run. But just as her foot was about to step out of the room, his voice rang out again, "In half an hour, please come back to take the tray." Oh God, he was indeed plotting something. In half an hour, after he finished eating and satisfied his appetite, he would come for her. She sat stiffly in a chair in the hall downstairs, her eyes fixed on the large clock on the wall. Dong, dong, the clock chimed heavily. It was now past 10 o'clock in the evening, more than half an hour had passed. Enhanyi knew very well that she was like meat on a chopping block, at the mercy of others. If she remained silent, it seemed he would not unleash his wildness to harm her body. If she did not obey his orders, the outcome would be dire. Being a maid was not so bad, it was much better than being sent into the hands of that Margaret, in a camp. As long as she was alive, there was a glimmer of hope. It was a blessing, not a curse. If it was a curse, she could not escape it. Enhanyi steeled herself and quickly ascended to the second floor. She opened the door a crack and quietly peered inside, only to see him lying bare on the bed, completely enveloped in soft white blankets. His breathing was steady, he seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep. Enhanyi finally let out a sigh of relief. She took off her shoes at the door, stepping barefoot onto the carpet, bending down, and crawling into the room. Suddenly, he turned over in bed, making a slight sound. Enhanyi froze in place, but fortunately, he did not wake up. She tiptoed to clear the plates and utensils from the small tea table and then dashed out of the room. A night of fear left her hardly able to sleep. Just as she was dozing off, the curtains in her bedroom were suddenly pulled open, and a blinding light flooded in. Ugh! Abigail, no! She instinctively raised her arm to shield her eyes. For the past few days, Maid Abigail had been pulling the curtains open without her consent, rudely waking her up. "Good morning. Did you sleep well? I was too tired last night to properly attend to you." It was his voice. This nearly made Enhanyi jump out of bed. The entire house had only her room without an internal lock. Even if there was a lock, he held the key and could come and go as he pleased. Seeing the terrified look on Enhanyi's face, he smiled and approached her, resting his elbow on the bed, saying with interest, "You must be hoping I never come back." "You?" Under his piercing gaze, Enhanyi kept retreating until she was cornered against the bed. "Figure. Get up, we are going to Madame Chanel's shop. I think you will like it there." "I don't want to go." Enhanyi shrank back under the covers, eyeing him suspiciously, knowing he had no good intentions. "Do you want to spend your life parading around in front of my soldiers in a nightgown?" He chuckled and turned to the door, stating bluntly, "See you downstairs in 5 minutes." Today, he was not wearing his black uniform trench coat but casual clothes, topped with a khaki velvet coat. Before she could step out, he took off the coat and draped it over her shivering form. He was left in just a shirt and sweater. He pulled her to the front of a black sedan, and unlike previous times, there was no driver in the car. "My driver is on leave today, so I'm driving." He took her arm and shoved her into the passenger seat. This was clearly the commercial district of the city. He led her into a shop that was not large, but the clothes inside were beautiful, with simple designs, elegant patterns, and pure colors. Back when she studied in America, Enhanyi often went shopping with friends on weekends. Now, she sat quietly in a chair for customers, her expression indifferent. He, on the other hand, stood in front of the racks, quickly searching through the clothes. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he pulled out a long pink dress. "This is this spring's new arrival, you have great taste," the shop assistant smiled as she approached. "Get this lady a size small." His gaze fell on Enhanyi. The shop assistant accompanied Enhanyi into the fitting room. She took off the long men's coat she had wrapped around herself, revealing only a lace nightgown underneath. The shop assistant's eyes widened in surprise, but she held back her curiosity and said nothing. "Miss, you should take off this nightgown to try on the dress, as the style is quite fitted," the shop assistant smiled. Enhanyi covered her chest, shyly saying, "I also want some essentials." She spoke softly, "A bra, panties, stockings, and preferably shoes that aren't too high." "Darling, we have everything you need, I'll get them for you right away." The shop assistant quickly gathered the items for her and tied a thin white leather belt around her waist to match the pink dress, accentuating her figure. "Miss, your figure and temperament are wonderful. You look beautiful in this dress." The shop assistant covered her mouth, laughing. "The gentleman who came in with you is quite handsome." Enhanyi looked down at her reflection in the mirror and snorted coldly, "Is he?" He was indeed handsome, but that didn't necessarily make him a gentleman. The shop assistant brought her, now fully dressed, in front of him. He nodded, "Not bad, it suits you well. Choose a few more." With that, he placed a stack of cash on the counter. "You are truly generous," the shop manager, who had been watching from behind the counter, covered her mouth and laughed. Enhanyi had no desire to shop, but under the shop assistant's strong recommendation, she still chose a few outfits for backup. He remained quietly waiting, showing no signs of impatience. The shop assistant packed the clothes she selected, and she put on the pink dress again, not because she particularly liked it, but because it was much better than wearing a lace nightgown underneath his coat. Finally, she had a decent outfit. "Thank you for your service, I will return." He smiled at the two women who were staring at him, then took Enhanyi's slender arm with one hand and lifted all the large paper bags with the other, pushing open the shop's revolving door. The two women couldn't help but sigh in admiration. "Oh my, who is that incredibly handsome man?" "I don't know, I've never seen him before." "If I had, I swear I would never forget him. Also, he is quite generous." "Do you think they have some kind of relationship? It feels a bit off." As the two women gazed longingly at his retreating figure, suddenly, a bullet shattered the glass, crashing into the shop. The glass door of the shop instantly shattered into pieces. "Ah!" the shop manager and the assistant screamed, hugging each other. He quickly turned towards the sound. The gunshot was clearly aimed at him but missed, the bullet piercing through the clothing store's glass door. "Ah!" Enhanyi reacted just like them, covering her head and crouching on the ground, trembling. "Get in the car." He yanked her into the black sedan. He started the car, and a series of gunshots rang out behind them. Bullets shattered the car windows, and she was jolted around, feeling disoriented. "Doug." He pressed her head down against the seat. Hard to discern. A truck full of snipers and a sedan were relentlessly pursuing them from behind. He had no choice but to drive the car into the suburbs. Bullets whizzed past his ears, and he shouted to her, "Give me the gun under your seat." Enhanyi could hardly imagine the scene of the car speeding away. She lowered her body as much as possible and felt around under the seat until she found a gun. As she pulled it out, he snatched it away, firing at the pursuers while steering the wheel. After a series of twists and turns, he managed to shake off all the pursuers, but the car was nearly totaled. Enhanyi was dragged out of the car by him, and she couldn't help but marvel at his combat skills, single-handedly taking down more than 10 guerrilla fighters. The process, lasting several hours, was thrilling. "The engine is broken," he said while checking the hood of the car. Now she felt a bit regretful. Why hadn't she taken the chance to escape when they had just left the clothing store? It was clearly too late to think about that now, as they were surrounded by wilderness, and dusk was approaching. He took some essentials from the trunk and glanced at her. "This place isn't safe. We need to find somewhere to spend the night and leave early tomorrow." She had no other choice but to follow him. She knew her survival skills in the wild were almost zero. They walked for a long time and finally found a cave to shelter in before sunset. He removed the bullets from the chamber of the handgun one by one and reloaded it. "Wait here for me. If you get lost trying to escape, I'm afraid I won't be able to save you." Enhanyi hugged her knees, curled up on the ground. After a moment, he returned with a bundle of dry grass and branches, which he piled in the cave. He looked at her and saw her still curled up quietly in the corner, so he went back outside. This time he was gone for about an hour, and when he returned, he brought back a wild rabbit. Skillfully, he slit its throat to let it bleed, skinned it, and started a campfire. He roasted the prepared rabbit for a long time until the surface was charred. "It seems done," she said, her stomach growling as she stared at the rabbit meat over the fire. He handed her a piece of the rabbit's leg. Although the roasted meat looked unappetizingly black on the outside, the inside was fully cooked and fragrant. She tried to take a bite, and it was really delicious. After the sun set, darkness enveloped the surroundings, with only the light from the campfire illuminating the cave. Enhanyi felt a bit cold and moved closer to the fire, extending her hands to warm them. Outside, the howls of wolves echoed. "Wolves!" Enhanyi nearly jumped in fright. He chuckled from the other side of the fire, seemingly mocking her ignorance. "There are many wolves outside, at least 5. 3 males and 2 females. How do you know that?" Although she was reluctant to talk to him, she couldn't help but ask. He glanced at her. "Because their howls are different. Good thing there are 6 bullets." After the earlier battle, Enhanyi had complete faith in his marksmanship. Even if 1 bullet was a blank, 5 wolves should be manageable. "Only 4 bullets," he said, tossing a dry branch into the fire. She clearly saw that there were still 6 bullets. Although she didn't know how he caught the rabbit, it was evident he hadn't shot it. Seeing through her confusion, he continued, "I always leave 1 for myself, and the other is for you." "Oh." She stared at him, realizing that those who commit many wrongs will ultimately meet their demise. With so many enemies, it was a wonder he wasn't ambushed while walking down the street. "Get some sleep and conserve your strength. We have a long way to go tomorrow morning." He slightly closed his eyes, leaning his upper body against the rock wall. She wanted to sleep, but the howls of the wolf pack around them kept her wide awake. Besides, there was a wolf beside her, a wolf whose intentions were hard to discern. In the past 2 days, he hadn't shown any inappropriate behavior towards her, but she couldn't guarantee he wouldn't suddenly go wild in the middle of the night. Regular patient. Under the moonlight, the howls of wolves rose and fell. Outside the cave was fraught with danger, and being with this wolf inside felt temporarily safe. Enhanyi recalled how he had sent her to the camp guard, Margaret. His purpose was to make her realize that the outside world was dangerous. If she wanted to survive, it was better to surrender to him and seek his protection than to expose herself to the wolf pack. The pathetic and laughable theory of protection that her cellmate, Julia, spoke of only existed in this wicked world. She covered her ears and muttered softly, "What a hellish place, full of demons and wolves." He suddenly opened his eyes. In the world of wolves, only the strongest can survive. The laws of human society are the same. She disagreed with his viewpoint. Even if it rose to a philosophical level, she wouldn't agree. She lowered her hands. "You're wrong. The difference between humans and animals is that humans have compassion." She faced him across the roaring campfire, confronting him with her words. He shook his head, staring at her noncommittally, his ice-blue pupils flickering with red light from the fire. "Humph. Of course, I'm talking about humans, not including you," Enhanyi said coldly, realizing she had made a serious mistake by discussing compassion with this cold-blooded Nazi. They were all devils, and they all deserved to go to hell. She lowered her head, no longer meeting his gaze, and inadvertently caught sight of the blood-soaked sleeve of his left arm. She was startled. It turned out he was injured. She had forgotten that he was also human, still so handsome, and occasionally showing a hint of gentlemanly demeanor. If he weren't wearing that black SS uniform, he wouldn't seem much like a devil. Noticing her gaze on his arm, his black pupils suddenly narrowed slightly. He then casually said, "I was shot." "Is it just a scratch?" She finally couldn't help but ask, her nursing instincts making her concerned about any injured person. Now, they were like grasshoppers tied to the same rope. "No, the bullet is still inside." The damage from a bullet being inside is much worse than a penetrating wound. Her medical knowledge prompted her to speak without thinking. If it's not removed immediately, it could lead to poisoning and infection. The smell of blood will attract wolves. He wasn't in a hurry to remove the bullet and provided a reason for it. She wasn't without fear, but that fear passed quickly. "I'm a nurse. I've worked with the Red Cross. General Ryan, please believe that I am professional," she emphasized, even though he didn't believe her identity. A nurse who graduated from a church school in America with a music major. He suddenly fixed his gaze on her face and asked. Enhanyi was taken aback. It turned out he had already investigated her background thoroughly. Her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I don't want to argue with you, but the wound needs to be treated immediately. Are you worried about me?" He laughed, his ice blue eyes shining brightly. "Don't misunderstand, I'm just acting on a nurse's ethics. I thought you hated me deep down." He stopped smiling, and his handsome face immediately turned fierce. She replied with righteous indignation, "I cannot condone your despicable actions, but a nurse's duty is to save lives, even yours cannot be neglected." "Even yours?" He lowered his head and chuckled coldly, "blind mercy often backfires. If you say you're afraid you won't be able to escape this desert, I can reluctantly believe that reason. Suit yourself. Our Red Cross's mission is to save lives, unlike you Nazis, who only care about interests." Enhanyi stood up and walked closer to him. He looked at her coldly. "If you think you can take advantage of the opportunity to remove the bullet and have ulterior motives, you know I can kill you without using a gun, just with one hand. It's you who has ulterior motives. If I were a man, I would definitely wipe out your troops on the battlefield." Enhanyi approached him and examined his arm, focusing on the wound without noticing the flicker of emotion in his ice blue eyes. "We need to take off your shirt. It would be best to have scissors to cut the fabric so as not to touch the wound. That's how standard first aid is done." But then she suddenly remembered how he had wickedly cut open her clothes before and done that to her, so it was clear she couldn't treat him like a regular patient. "Shampoo? What? Not going to be a white angel anymore?" He noticed her expression suddenly turn serious. "Then you can take it off yourself." She wished she could stab him again. He raised an eyebrow and had to take off his outer sweater. "It's a pity I'm not in the combat unit, otherwise, I would love to see your combat skills. However, a woman wanting a man's life doesn't actually need a gun." She pretended not to hear his words, rolled up his shirt sleeves, and continued to examine the wound. The entry point of the bullet had burn marks, a small wound with not much blood flowing, but the trouble was that the bullet was lodged in the muscle. She had only learned the theory of battlefield first aid. Theoretically, the first step was to enlarge the wound, but there were no sterilization equipment or surgical knives here. Noticing she was looking for something, he pulled out a dagger from his waist, engraved with an eagle design, and tossed it to her. "Use this." She picked up the dagger and repeatedly heated it over the flames. Against the rock wall, her figure drew closer to him, the blade pointed at him, resembling a murder. Her hands trembled. He was unafraid but slightly worried. "My angel, please prepare a tourniquet first. Do you want me to bleed to death?" He now suspected she was taking the opportunity to seek revenge. She put down the dagger, her face a bit embarrassed. In fact, she had really forgotten. When she learned in school, there were always teachers preparing gauze and medicines for them. She looked around. His sweater was too thick and sturdy to be used as a bandage, so she decided to tear her skirt. The hem of her new pink long skirt was torn into strips, leaving only the bare minimum for coverage. He stared at her trembling hands in confusion, clearly unaware of how to cut to enlarge the wound and extract the bullet. He gently measured above the wound with his fingers, indicating how she should cut. As the blade pierced into his wound, she seemed to be encouraging herself, murmuring, "This is a minor surgical procedure, those 6 months of medical classes weren't for nothing." 6 months? His eyes widened in shock, the pain from the wound forcing him to grit his teeth and curse silently in his heart. Those useless fools! The investigation materials clearly stated 2 years. A bloodied bullet was finally extracted. He was drenched in sweat but made no sound, as if that arm didn't belong to him. Enhanyi bandaged him tightly, ensuring the wound wouldn't bleed anymore. After completing these tasks, she let out a long sigh. This was the first surgical operation in her life. She was sweating more than the patient. Suddenly, she seemed to remember something and asked softly, "Are you not in pain?" He lowered his head, turned his face away, and pressed his body tightly against the rock wall, remaining silent. She decided to ignore him and added some dry wood to the campfire. The fire crackled and burned brighter. "See, don't think only men can do these things, I can do them too. I'm not used to letting women do things, that only complicates matters." His voice became a bit hoarse. "Don't forget who just saved you." For some reason, Enhanyi suddenly felt a sense of pride. She was no longer as afraid of him as before. Even a wolf, when injured, knows to hide its teeth and pretend to be gentle and weak to elicit sympathy from others. He frowned, but a slight smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Don't worry, I will repay your kindness with malice." His words were not false at all. He quickly cast aside the fact that she had taken the bullet out for him and bandaged his wound. Like a master commanding a servant, he had her change his dressings, fetch water, and bring him meals. That was still acceptable, but he even asked her to help him bathe. Throughout her life, she had never served anyone. He lay in the bathtub, his body below the chest covered in a frothy shampoo, with several layers of gauze wrapped around his left arm, which could not get wet due to the gunshot wound, resting on the edge of the tub. "The shampoo is in the cabinet below. When you wash my hair later, don't forget to massage it with your little hands." Even though she knew he was a man of dual nature, Enhanyi still felt her face flush. She mumbled softly, bent down, and opened the cabinet under the sink, preparing to take out the shampoo. Silver rack. Suddenly, a jet of hot water shot out from the shower head above the bathtub, drenching her. Holding her wet top, her small face turned bright red. You did that on purpose." "That's right." Seeing her embarrassment, he leaned back against the tub and chuckled several times. "You ungrateful scoundrel!" She glared at him angrily. He did not respond, instead sitting up in the tub, lifting her chin with his right hand, and inappropriately complimented, "You are truly beautiful." He seemed to enjoy her bashful demeanor, which was genuine and not the coyness typical of modern girls. She turned her face away, breaking free from his grip. This time, he did not get angry at her resistance. "Go get me a glass of wine, darling. You perverted drunk." Enhanyi hurried out of the bathroom and went to the wine cabinet in the room, thinking it would be best to let him drink himself to death, letting his wound rot down to the bone. Since there was a storage room and a wine cellar next to the kitchen in the basement of the house, there wasn't much wine in the cabinet. Enhanyi glanced around and spotted a bottle of Absolute vodka on the double-decker shelf, which was a type of strong liquor. Right. Why not take this opportunity to teach that perverted guy a lesson? Enhanyi came up with a plan. She opened the bottle, and a strong smell of alcohol wafted up. She grabbed a large wine glass from the side and filled it to the brim. Holding the wine, Enhanyi imitated the tone of a hotel server and said in a sarcastic manner, "Sir, your wine has arrived." As she stepped into the bathroom, she pretended to slip, tipping the entire tray towards the bathtub, spilling the entire glass of wine over his shoulder, directly soaking the white gauze on his injured arm. He was momentarily stunned, then immediately covered his arm and flipped over in the tub. "I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to." She turned around, pretending to look for a towel to wipe him off, secretly laughing to herself, realizing he also knew pain. His icy blue eyes glared at her fiercely, the alcohol soaking into the wound on his arm causing him intense pain. He quickly tore off the soaked gauze, turned on the shower, and let the water wash over the wound. After rinsing for a while, he coldly said, "Go get the first aid kit and rebandage it for me." After saying that, he stood up from the bathtub. She quickly lowered her head, seeing him cover himself with a long bath towel as he walked out of the bathroom into the bedroom. Enhanyi secretly glanced at his back, but the sight before her stunned her. His broad back was covered in scars, the lines crisscrossing, some deep, some shallow, resembling the climbing branches of a rose, not only growing wildly on his back but also adorned with flesh-colored thorns. These did not look like wounds from shrapnel on a battlefield, they resembled marks left by the claws of some wild beast. Compared to these ferocious scars, the gunshot wound on his arm was nothing. As if sensing her gaze, he turned to her and said, "Didn't expect this, did you? I'm not perfect either. If you've seen enough, go get the first aid kit immediately." She gasped. She had never thought of him as a perfect person. Indeed, his face was very handsome, and his figure was perfect, but inside, he was a devil with a glint in his eye, a complete pervert. Thinking of this, she quickly retracted the sympathy that had surged within her due to the scars on his back. She quickly brought the first aid kit, seeing him already dressed in pajamas, sitting in a recliner waiting. "I'm really sorry, I truly didn't mean it just now," she said, feeling a bit guilty. "It's fine." Although he said this, his cold gaze sent shivers down her spine. She cleaned his wound, applied the medicine, and rebandaged it tightly. After tidying up the cotton balls and alcohol, she closed the first aid kit, only to see him walk to the door, suddenly slamming it shut with a bang, and locking it from the inside. Enhanyi immediately felt nervous. What do you want to do? He smiled but did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the wine cabinet, opening the glass door and taking a glass from the silver rack. Serious? This guy really was a drunkard. Did he want to drink again? Enhanyi's heart raced, but his action of locking the door and his malicious gaze made her realize that things were not that simple. Hold this. He handed the glass to her, making her hold it with both hands, then lifted her arms, making her raise the glass above her head. He poured a full glass of red wine into the glass she was holding. She looked up in confusion, not knowing what he was planning next. Very good, just like that. He sat back in the recliner, smiling. Her arms, held high, began to feel slightly sore. What do you mean by this? He took a thick book from the small bookshelf by the window, casually flipped through a few pages, and said nonchalantly, "Hold it well, if a single drop of this wine spills, you can imagine the consequences." He threatened her directly. Pervert. Shameless. She cursed in her heart. His mind was so small, this was clearly revenge for what had just happened. But she dared not defy him, standing there like a statue. Gradually, her arms began to ache and tingle. After more than 10 minutes, it felt as if her arms were no longer her own. Yet he continued to read leisurely as if she did not exist. Enhanyi glanced at the wall clock. An hour had already passed. He remained engrossed in his book until a sudden ringing phone broke the silence. He picked up the receiver, and after a long conversation, he merely responded softly, saying before hanging up, "Deliver it to my bedroom in a bit." He walked to the front door and unlocked it. Her hands were trembling uncontrollably. He supported her elbow and repeated, "Hold it steady, darling." Enhanyi's eyes brimmed with tears, struggling to hold them back. Before long, there was a knock at the door. Enhanyi instinctively looked toward the entrance. Someone had arrived. "Come in." He lifted his head and said. In walked his aide, Lieutenant Jacob, a handsome man in a crisp uniform, slender with a pair of vigilant green eyes. Lieutenant Jacob walked straight toward him, but since she was standing in front of the wine cabinet, he had to nod at her as he passed by, then approached General Ryan. "General, here are the documents you requested." "Thank you." He casually placed the documents on the small coffee table, stood up from the recliner, and said, "Jacob, come have a drink." He walked to the wine cabinet and took the glass of red wine from her trembling hands raised above her head, handing it to his aide. "Thank you, General." Lieutenant Jacob did not decline, taking the glass and sipping from it. Thank goodness, this aide was indeed her savior. Just as Enhanyi was about to lower her numb arms, she saw him take another empty glass from the wine cabinet, signaling her to raise her hands again while pouring wine into the glass and chatting casually with his aide. Enhanyi's tears of grievance finally fell. Lieutenant Jacob's green eyes occasionally swept over her. "General, today's wine is very good, your glass rack is quite special." Hearing his aide's words, he held the wine glass in one hand and glanced at Enhanyi. "She is a gift from Dr. Jackson. You know, maintaining his racial laboratory requires military funding." He swallowed a small sip of wine, smiling at Lieutenant Jacob. "She can play the piano and dance," he said, lifting her black hair. "What else can you do, my angel?" Enhanyi's face was filled with hot tears, and she tightly pursed her lips, not answering his question. "See, she is very silent, she still needs education." He seemed to laugh at himself. Lieutenant Jacob also smiled in agreement, his green eyes flickering. "I think I should take my leave, I wish you a good night." "Thank you." He raised his glass to his aide. "Believe me, I will sleep very soundly tonight." Lieutenant Jacob left his bedroom and closed the door again. As his long fingers skillfully locked the inner lock, her hopes were once again dashed. "What do you want from me?" She could no longer hold on, her tear-filled eyes staring at him. He placed the wine glass on the table. "I only said you couldn't move, I never said I couldn't move you." After saying this, his hand reached out to touch her. She could not bear this kind of touch, it made her tremble all over. The glass slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor with a loud crash, the crimson wine spilling everywhere. He shook his head, softly sighing, "What a pity, not only did you spill my wine, but you also broke my glass." She glared at him, it was clearly him being unreasonable. He intended to assault her and needed no further excuse, this shameless, despicable man. It seemed he was serious this time. She instinctively cried out, "No! Please don't! I swear I won't do that again, please!" Frustrations. "Now you know fear, you little prankster." He paid no attention to her pleas, tightly gripping her wrists, and from the coat rack, he pulled down the shoulder strap of his uniform, skillfully wrapping it around her wrists twice and tying a firm knot. He lifted her body and placed her on the high counter next to the wine cabinet. Enhanyi was firmly bound, her legs dangling in the air, lying flat on the high counter. She turned her head, staring at him in terror, as he opened the glass door of the wine cabinet again, his long fingers gliding over the 2 rows of bottles. "Since you broke my wine glass, you will be my wine glass." He took another bottle of red wine from the cabinet, opened the cap, but instead of pouring it into a glass, he held the bottle and came before her, placing it in front of her nose, intentionally letting her smell the aroma of the red wine, and softly said, "1912, Chateau Latour." He lifted her neck with one hand and, with the other holding the wine bottle, slowly tilted it down along her collar. "Ah, no!" Enhanyi cried out, seeing the icy red liquid pouring from the bottle, spilling onto her body. "Don't!" Her hands were tightly bound by the strap, and no matter how she struggled, she could not break free. After trembling back to her room, she immediately sat on the floor and cried loudly. That pervert actually treated her like a cup. In his eyes, she was merely a container, a doll. This was the greatest mockery and contempt a man could show a woman. He remained unchanged, and in the end, he never possessed her body. Enhanyi was already certain he was a eunuch. Falling into the hands of such a pervert was simply worse than death. The next morning, he could sit at the dining table and eat breakfast without a hint of embarrassment or guilt, as if nothing had happened the night before. The maid, Abigail, still wore a cold expression as she served a plate of steak and poured him a shallow glass of red wine. He swirled the glass, closed his eyes, and inhaled the aroma of the wine. Enhanyi's face turned red to the tips of her ears. She swore she would never touch red wine again for the rest of her life. Eat more meat, you're too thin, he smiled, pushing the plate of beef in front of Enhanyi. Enhanyi clasped her hands on her knees. There were deep, dark bruises on her wrists, marks left by the pervert who had bound her with the straps of his uniform last night. She glanced at the steak, which still had traces of blood. I'm not a wolf, I don't eat raw meat. He seemed not to understand the implications of her words. Abigail, go to the kitchen and have the steak cooked before bringing it back. Abigail dared not delay. She quickly walked past Enhanyi, a hint of resentment in her demeanor as she took the steak away. Just as the maid turned to go down the stairs, Captain Jacob entered through the front door, striding confidently toward him. I apologize for interrupting your meal, General. The investigation you requested has yielded results. Who did it? He took a sip from his glass. It was a group of enemy paratroopers. Paratroopers? They know my whereabouts, my license plate number, the shops I visit. They might even know my woman's size. I think it's because someone is pulling strings behind the scenes. My friend, it's clear that those old geezers want me dead. But since they are so generous, I will return the favor. He raised 2 fingers, and Captain Jacob immediately understood, bowing his head and leaning in to listen. His eyes shifted focus repeatedly. As he whispered instructions, he raised his ice blue eyes to look at her across the table, a hint of a smile in his gaze, making it hard to associate him with the plotting of revenge and murder. Enhanyi watched all of this, a fine display of a dog-eat-dog farce. With years of warlords fighting in the country, it seemed the upper echelons of the Nazi Party were also engaged in fierce struggles. The world was the same everywhere, filled with endless conflict. She had no interest in what he and his aide were conspiring about, she was just relieved that they left the house quickly. With his departure, Abigail finally vented all her frustrations. She slammed the plate down in front of Enhanyi. Eat. Hide. I'm full, Enhanyi replied coldly. In fact, she hadn't eaten a single grain of rice, just the sight of that glass of red wine made her stomach churn, leaving her no appetite. I went to the trouble of having the steak cooked for you, and you won't even take a bite? Truly ungrateful. Abigail angrily took the plate away. Enhanyi didn't have the energy to be angry with the maid, at least she didn't like her, and that disdain was genuine, unlike his duplicitous nature. He didn't return until late at night, this time bringing back a woman. Enhanyi saw his car drive into the yard from the window. The woman was escorted out of the car. She wore a long black dress, and her hair was styled extravagantly. He took this woman up to the third floor. Enhanyi peered through the crack in the door. The woman's back was alluring, dressed flamboyantly. Her steps were somewhat hurried as he led her into the adjacent room. Enhanyi felt relieved, thinking at least he wouldn't come looking for trouble with her tonight. However, the woman's cries of pain from the next room made it impossible for her to sleep all night. The next day, just as dawn broke, she knew he had left the house early. Today, he didn't send maid Abigail in to forcibly drag her downstairs to have breakfast with him. She felt a mix of curiosity and sympathy for the woman in the next room, guessing from her screams last night that she must have been beaten badly. Enhanyi walked to the door, tentatively pushing it open. She saw the woman in black sitting on the bed with a dejected expression. Her skin was very pale, delicate as if made of fine jade, which made the bruise on her neck even more pronounced. "Are you okay?" Although she didn't know who this woman was or why she was here, they shared a bond of suffering. Perhaps she too was imprisoned here. "Do you need my help?" The woman raised her eyes, staring blankly for a moment before saying indifferently, "Give me a cigarette." "I don't have cigarettes, I only have a first aid kit." "I can help you with your wounds, you have an injury on your neck, right?" "Don't worry, I just saw from the window that the devil has already left." "Then, thank you," the woman in black replied somewhat reluctantly but still accepted her kindness. Enhanyi sat by the bed and began to clean her wounds. The woman's expression was not panicked, instead, she engaged Enhanyi in casual conversation while she worked. "You must not be Jewish, right?" She had beautiful violet eyes and looked at Enhanyi with interest. "In my club, there's a African girl who, like you, has black hair and black eyes." No. I'm not African." Enhanyi interrupted her. She knew a brutal war was raging in the country, and she hated the African invaders. "You don't need to be so agitated, I was just saying you resemble her. You're much prettier than she is." The woman blinked her violet eyes a few times, leaning closer to Enhanyi, whispering, "You look so pure and lovely, sometimes men like girls like that." "I'm not a prostitute." Enhanyi admitted that the woman was very beautiful, but her every move exuded a strong air of the brothel, which made Enhanyi, who had always been proper, feel uncomfortable. "I used to be a prostitute, now I run the largest brothel in this city," the woman said, pulling her red lips into a smile. Enhanyi was taken aback. In her mind, prostitution was the lowest profession, and this woman spoke so openly about her identity. However, she paused for a moment before continuing to apply medicine. That devil, why did he bring you here? Ryan? He wants to ask me about something. The woman smiled somewhat helplessly and then asked in return, what about you? How did you end up here? I was also captured. Just as Enhanyi was about to explain, she suddenly heard footsteps coming up the stairs outside. She was already familiar with that sound, the thud of his boots on the wooden stairs, a sound that was terrifying to her, like a death knell. Oh no, I can't let him see me, he will kill me. It was clearly too late to escape back to her room. Enhanyi looked around and could only choose to hug the first aid kit and hide in the large wardrobe. Alcohol. Well, have you thought it over? He had just entered the room and slapped the woman hard across the face. She was knocked over, and he grabbed her hair, choking her neck. No, Ryan, I can't breathe, the woman struggled repeatedly. Enhanyi was somewhat shocked, he was so brutal and merciless. Although this time it wasn't directed at her, she still couldn't help but tremble, worried for the woman's fate. He didn't loosen his grip, instead, he tightened it further. I don't want to know what price you sold the information extracted from the Empire's citizens to the Russians or Americans. I just want to know who sold me out. What do you want? You know what I want. Her crimson lips were bloodied, yet she smiled at him. His eyes lingered on her face for a few seconds before he released her, throwing his head back and laughing loudly. Now that's a huge joke. Do you think I'm still that debauched man raised by the Countess? Don't force me to talk you again, I swear this time it won't just be with a whip. You can't treat me like this, don't forget, I once saved your life. What do you want me to do to you? You should know that repaying kindness with enmity is my nature. He stared coldly at her. Perhaps I should send someone to seal off your club and send your girls to the front lines. The soldiers there need their services more than these gentlemen in the rear. You are still so heartless. Fine, I can tell you, but not because of your threats and intimidation. The woman whispered a few words to him, that's all I know. I hope what you said is the truth. I have no reason to lie to you. The woman shrugged. A smile appeared at the corner of his lips, completely different from before. If you had cooperated earlier, last night's unpleasantness wouldn't have happened. Is that so? What do you plan to do next? His position is higher than yours. Do you think my rank comes from the commander's appreciation? That I rely on my looks? Of course not, I've seen your methods, the woman said, looking directly at his back with her violet eyes, her arms crossed over her chest. What I mean is you should be careful of him. Enhanyi watched everything happening outside through the crack in the wardrobe. She realized their relationship was not as she had imagined. She could even be sure that the woman had intentionally stayed here last night. The way she looked at him had none of the air of a woman of the night, it was as pure and untainted as a girl in love gazing at her crush. This was too crazy. To spend another night with this devil, she was willing to endure his beatings. The only explanation was that the madam of the brothel was crazily in love with him. How could anyone fall in love with this devil? The closet door was suddenly flung open. Enhanyi's heart skipped a beat, and his tone was unfriendly. I thought there was a mouse in this room, turns out it was you. She came to help me with the medicine, said the woman in black, hands on her hips, her attitude making Enhanyi feel that his earlier kindness was utterly unnecessary. She dared not look at him, casting a wistful glance at the woman. Get lost. He squinted his blue eyes, his tone extremely impatient. Enhanyi felt as if he had been granted a reprieve. He didn't even bother to grab the first aid kit and scrambled out of the closet, fleeing the room. Watching Enhanyi's retreating figure, the woman in black spoke in a somewhat unusual tone. Her dark eyes are quite enchanting. When did you start liking this Eastern charm? Ruth, you can go back. If this happens again, don't blame me for being ruthless. That doesn't matter, you've always been so heartless. The woman in black lifted her skirt and descended the stairs, her long neck marred with bruises, yet her demeanor remained regal like a queen. He kicked open her door, and Enhanyi immediately caught the strong scent of alcohol in the air. She leaped up from the bed, her golden hair tousled, clearly intoxicated, holding a wine glass as he staggered into her room. The brightness in his blue eyes was striking. As soon as he entered, he pushed her down onto the bed. Enhanyi turned her head away to avoid his alcohol-laden lips landing on her face. Olympic Games. He adjusted her face and kissed her lips, but Enhanyi immediately pressed her mouth shut, denying him any further chance to humiliate her. Suddenly, he felt a wave of nausea, bending over to dry heave onto the floor. Enhanyi wiped the alcohol from her lips, knowing that his past might be quite unsavory. From his conversation with that brothel madam, it was clear he was not the type of officer born into an upper-class family with a good education. Rather, he had likely mingled with prostitutes. He retched a few times but couldn't expel the alcohol from his stomach. Lacking the energy to force her again, he slumped onto her bed, falling into a deep sleep, his golden hair sprawled messily on the pillow. Perhaps because of his striking beauty, even in a drunken stupor, he still exuded an innate elegance. Enhanyi quickly rolled out of bed, sharing a room with this wolf. She dared not sleep. But after midnight, her eyes grew too heavy to keep open. She tried to distance herself from him, curling up on the floor in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall, and gradually fell asleep. When she woke up, Enhanyi found herself lying on a soft bed, covered with a warm blanket. She could hear him retching by the toilet, followed by the sound of flushing. Enhanyi immediately got out of bed. He was only wearing a white top and shorts, his hair still messy, but those icy blue eyes were already alert. He covered his mouth and slowly walked out of the bathroom. My angel, good morning. He walked to the chair and noticed the shirt draped over the back was already stained. Call Abigail to take these clothes for washing, and you, come back immediately. Enhanyi bent down to gather the dirty clothes scattered on the floor, silently opening the door, only to find the maid Abigail standing at the entrance, startling her. Abigail ignored her and respectfully said to him, "Boss, Mr. Harry has arrived." "What?" He tilted his head, as if he hadn't heard her clearly. "You forgot, he has an appointment. He's here to take your measurements for a tailored suit at 10 this morning." "I forgot. Do you need breakfast first?" "No, let him come here." "All right. Take these clothes for washing," Enhanyi was just about to seize the opportunity to leave the room when he calmly called out to her, "Not you, you stay to tidy the bed." Enhanyi lowered her head and walked to the bedside to arrange the pillows and the messy blanket, just finishing when she heard a very peculiar voice. "General Ryan, I'm very sorry to disturb you again. I just heard you were still resting." The newcomer was a strangely dressed man in immaculate attire, his white wig not appearing affected but rather elegant. He bowed to him. "Harry, good to see you." He rose from the chair, smiling as he greeted the newcomer. Enhanyi knew she couldn't leave this room, so she found the least conspicuous corner and sat on a stool. The tailor named Harry opened his toolkit and surveyed him from head to toe. "General, you've maintained your figure quite well," he sincerely praised while pulling out a measuring tape to wrap around his waist. "But it seems your waist has widened a bit, you've been drinking quite a lot lately." "I'm no longer a 20-something young man." He laughed, aware of the smell of alcohol on himself. If it weren't for the tailor waiting outside, he would have preferred to take a shower first. "You are the youngest general in the Empire." Your hips seem to have slimmed down a bit." The tailor took out a notebook, recording this set of data. His shoulders were broad, waist narrow, a standard inverted triangle. He cooperatively turned around to allow the tailor to measure his back to the hem. "Is this for someone's sudden whim again?" "It's a new spring outfit personally designed by the Führer for the SS officers, of course, with matching boots and a hat." "Is there going to be a fashion show? Didn't we just finish an Olympic Games not long ago?" "Yes, the Führer is talented and creative." "I agree with you, but I'm not an athlete or a model, I'm a soldier, yet the Empire's dignitaries often forget this." "Winter. But you are undoubtedly the pride of the Empire. The Führer praises you as the elegant Atlantis Knight of the SS Black Knights, the highest standard of pure Aryan German blood." The tailor finished taking measurements and draped a piece of fine dark blue wool over him, quickly cutting the fabric along his neck with scissors. "But to be honest, it's clearly inappropriate for us to keep coming to you as a model every time we design new clothing. You finally understand my plight, Rude." He smiled. The tailor wrapped another piece of fabric around his long legs, tailoring it to fit, and secured it with a long needle. Your figure isn't standard, the term standard only applies to most people. No German soldier can achieve your level of golden ratio. You are a unique and incredible existence. I dare say, even a sackcloth draped over you would look as handsome as a Greek deity. Harry, I've grown tired of your flattery. Though his words were somewhat impatient, he still cooperatively held up the gradually fitting trousers at the waist while the tailor lowered the cuffs a bit to cover his instep, realizing the initial length was a bit short. It's been 5 years, those dresses, shirts, coats, capes, hats, you've filled my wardrobe. Have you ever seen a man with so many clothes? I don't have a cross-dressing fetish. Done. Look, it's perfect. The tailor clasped his hands, standing behind him, eyes gazing into the mirror. The thin wool fabric, after the recent stitching, had transformed into a fitted suit on him. The tailor marked 2 lines with chalk on the side of the suit. The pockets are here, and this is for the sword belt. What do you think, darling? Enhanyi looked over at them. The outfit was indeed beautiful, and the tailor had skilled hands. He suddenly remembered something. By the way, Harry, while you're at it, get me a new uniform belt. The tailor immediately replied cheerfully, of course, that's no problem. Do you need anything else? Nothing else, just this accessory wears out the easiest. He smiled, his gaze landing directly on Enhanyi. Is he a eunuch? The tailor, having completed his task, bid farewell. He turned to Enhanyi, raising the corners of his mouth in a smile. You see, this is truly troublesome. Enhanyi stood there, thinking perhaps he was in a good mood today. His temper was unpredictable, making him hard to read, but she sensed he wouldn't easily forgive her for entering the neighboring room without permission to help that brothel madam with her medicine. I drank a bit too much last night, it's a pity you weren't there to celebrate the victory with me. He approached her, whispering in her ear, a general has disappeared from the SS roster. British car, always so unstable. I didn't want to move against him so soon, it's just a pity he didn't know his place, trying to take the initiative. Enhanyi stared at him suspiciously, not understanding why he was telling her these things. The news she had just learned from that brothel madam in the morning, and by night he had already assassinated a political rival. His speed of reaction and decisiveness were terrifying. Thinking of this made her shiver. You're trembling. His hand gently caressed her waist. Don't be afraid, you need to relax a bit. I still have some matters to attend to, and tonight I'll take you somewhere nice. He pushed her out of the rose-colored room and into the hall, where the song and dance performance was still ongoing. Ruth, fanning herself with a feather fan, walked over to him and Enhanyi, covering her mouth as she laughed. Oh my, you are really quick. Hearing the boss lady's teasing, he did not argue. He lifted her small face. She's not quite used to this place. Enhanyi was still sobbing, preferring to keep her eyes downcast, never daring to look up at him. Baby, Let's go home. You're welcome to come again, the boss lady said as she escorted them to the door, fiddling with her red fox scarf. After shoving her into the car, the driver started the engine. He sat in the front seat and said to the driver, "It's a bit stuffy in here." The driver did not respond. He rolled down the window and unbuttoned his collar, the cold night wind blowing in through the front window, mercilessly brushing against her. It was winter, and the temperature was low. The cold wind made her shiver, and she covered her mouth to stifle a sneeze. "Cold, baby?" He kindly rolled up the window and turned to look at her, saying, "It's you who makes me feel hot." Viscous liquid. She sniffled and moved to the back behind the driver. Even though he hadn't claimed her, having forced her to do that kind of thing for him, she was already far from the concept of virtue. It was only a matter of time before she would be humiliated. Whether to live in such humiliation or die nobly, her dark eyes gazed out into the bottomless darkness of the night, contemplating whether to live or die. Ahead, several arch lights were flashing. It was a checkpoint. And Hanyi didn't remember there being a checkpoint when they arrived. A soldier armed to the teeth approached the car, gesturing for them to stop. The driver halted the car. The soldier reached the side of the window. "Sir, there is a curfew now. Please step out for inspection." The flashlight in the soldier's hand shone on his chest, revealing his military rank and medals. "Oh no, sir, long live the Führer." "Long live the Führer," he responded to the soldier's greeting. "Corporal, is there something wrong? Please forgive me." "Sir, we are on orders to capture a Jewish female fugitive. Do you need to check my car?" "Of course not, General." "That's fine, carry on with your mission, Corporal." "Yes, sir." The soldier looked into the car and seemed puzzled by Hanyi, who was huddled in the back seat. "This lady, your identification." "I can vouch for her. You know, girls don't carry work permits when they come out at night." "Of course, General, please proceed." The roadblock was lifted, and the car drove past the checkpoint. He lit a cigarette and chatted with the driver. "That young man is really dull." The driver merely smiled and did not respond. It was already past midnight, they had returned too late, and only the guard at the gate was still on duty. "I'm a bit hungry," he said, looking at her. "Go to the kitchen and get something to eat." After saying that, he walked up the stairs. Hanyi went to the servants' room on the side of the first floor and knocked on Abigail's door a few times, but there was no response. She had no choice but to feel her way into the basement kitchen in the dark. The cupboard had flour, dried ham, and raw beef. Looking at these ingredients, she felt somewhat helpless. Not to mention she didn't know how to cook Western food, even the home-cooked dishes from her hometown were beyond her. From childhood to adulthood, she had lived a life where everything was provided for her, with the cook in charge of all 3 meals. Her mother was very capable and cooked well, and several of her sisters learned from her, but no matter how she tried, she could never learn, as if she was born with an insensitivity to cooking. Asking her to make bread was simply absurd. Fortunately, there was flour. Enhanyi remembered that the soup loved by people in South Africa was made from flour. She lit a fire, put water in the pot, and added a handful of flour. She couldn't find any scallions or cilantro. She remembered there should be shredded chicken in it, but they didn't eat chicken, only beef. She took down a large chunk of beef hanging on a hook, cut a few pieces with a knife, and tossed them into the pot. Then she found a round cabbage in the vegetable basket, peeled off a few leaves, and threw them in. Next, she added butter, salt, cheese, and whatever seasonings she could find. Perhaps she added too much butter. It didn't quite resemble dumpling soup but looked more like a bowl of sweet slop. Just as Enhanyi was about to carry this bowl away from the kitchen, she suddenly thought of something and selected a small knife about 1 centimeter long from the knife rack, secretly hiding it in her pocket. Watching her bring him a basin of yellow, viscous liquid floating with vegetable leaves and chunks of beef, his brows furrowed tightly. He picked up a ladle, scooped out a spoonful, and put it in his mouth. A fishy and greasy taste overwhelmed him. He covered his mouth and ran to the bathroom, throwing it all up. "Oh my God, are you even a woman? I really can't cook." She knew she had messed up again and cried out of grievance. He would surely think she was taking revenge, especially since he had just made her vomit once. He grabbed her arm and took her to the basement, setting up the cooking tools. Skillfully, he peeled potatoes, grated them into shreds, and salted them to marinate for a while. Commit. Meanwhile, he heated the pot, added the shredded potatoes, stir-fried them a few times, pressed them into a potato cake, and flipped it over to fry until both sides turned golden brown. He placed small chunks of butter at the edge of the pot, letting it melt slowly, filling the air with a fragrant aroma. He grated cheese, sprinkled it over the fried potato cake, and then placed it in the oven. He opened a can of beef and poured it onto a plate. "Small peeler," he extended a hand toward her. Her heart raced several times faster. She fished out the small knife from her pocket, the very one she had just hidden. How could he notice that one small knife among so many utensils? I wanted to use it to peel apples," she stammered, lips trembling as she explained. "Baby, even for killing, you need the right tools. If you can't even peel potatoes, what do you want a knife for?" He said this while taking out the golden potato cake from the oven and placing it on the table. "What's wrong? Don't you want to taste my cooking?" After taking a bite of the potato cake, he found it delicious, but Enhanyi had no mind to savor it. She felt anxious inside. Clearly, he didn't believe her that she had hidden the knife just to peel fruit. They never peeled fruit when eating. She stole a glance at him, only to see him enjoying his meal, finishing the entire can of beef without leaving a trace, seemingly having forgotten what had just happened. Enhanyi lowered her head. The most terrifying thing about this man was that every time she offended him, he wouldn't immediately show his displeasure. Instead, he appeared very forgiving, waiting until later to settle the score, retaliating even more harshly. "How is it? Tasty?" She nodded absently, quickly stuffing a small piece of potato cake into her mouth before getting up to wash the dishes. Suddenly, he hugged her from behind. The plate slipped from her hands and fell into the sink, the faucet still running, the sound of water splashing loudly. One arm tightly wrapped around her waist, he turned off the faucet with the other hand. "What do you want to do with this little knife?" He didn't know when he had the knife in his hand, swiftly pressing the tip against her neck, the sharp point piercing the skin under her jaw, drawing tiny beads of blood. "No. Here, if this continues, cutting your throat and the arteries in your neck will make blood spray out and suffocate you to death." He held the knife, measuring it against her rapidly rising chest. "Here, stabbing your heart will cause instant death." She was still afraid of dying. She was truly afraid of dying. "Please, I really didn't mean to. Do you want me to forgive you?" He sneered coldly, like a judge from the underworld, showing no mercy. "There's another way that won't let you die immediately but will make you bleed to death slowly." He moved the knife hand under her skirt and suddenly raised his hand. "Ah!" She closed her eyes and let out a terrified scream. Fortunately, the blade was facing her, and he didn't actually let the knife hurt her. "That place is still reserved for me." He smiled wickedly, then with a clang, threw the knife onto the table and turned to go upstairs. Enhanyi's tears froze on her cheeks as she leaned against the wall, her body slowly sinking down until she collapsed onto the cold basement floor, trembling as she touched her neck, her fingertips stained with a bit of blood, no longer having the courage to take that knife. In the following days, Enhanyi was on edge every night, not daring to sleep at all. This tortured her, leaving her sleep-deprived and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She could only take short naps when he left during the day. Abigail naturally wouldn't let her be at peace. Only when she was bathing could she lock the door and enjoy a moment of tranquility. Enhanyi stared at herself in the bathroom mirror, her white body marred by several wounds on her neck, arms, and ankles. She had once been so pure and whole, her body and skin given to her by her parents. She had been their precious daughter, a delicate young lady, but now she could not control her own body. She wanted to commit suicide but couldn't muster the courage. When the gun barrel and knife blade were aimed at her, she surrendered on her knees. He was exploiting her weakness, seeing through her fear of death, conquering her inner terror. But what had she done wrong? She was just an ordinary girl, not a strong warrior. Enhanyi hugged her knees, curling up in the bathtub, and began to cry uncontrollably. Indecent. She couldn't take it anymore, she really couldn't take it. This wolf was gradually invading her, gnawing at her thoughts and soul. She was completely under his control, yet it felt as if there was still a glimmer of hope. As long as everything went according to his arrangements and she carefully followed his rules, she could temporarily find refuge, but she couldn't endure this humiliation. This perverted man, for reasons unknown, had a special obsession with virgins. He was using her purity and life to threaten her, watching her tremble in his palm, constantly pleading. Suddenly, a bold thought crossed her mind: if she were no longer a virgin, perhaps he would lose interest in her. But how could she rid herself of this virginity? She couldn't help but chuckle at her own thoughts. They were both absurd and tragic. In this crazy world, anything could happen. She seriously contemplated the possibility of this situation, the indecent scenes from the salon flashing through her mind. Once she did that, she wouldn't be considered a virgin anymore. But he held supreme authority. No man in this house dared to lay a hand on her. Abigail impatiently knocked on her bathroom door, interrupting her thoughts. "What are you still dawdling for? The general is calling for you in his room." She walked heavily into his room, seeing him sitting in a recliner in his pajamas, just out of the shower, cheerfully drying his golden hair with a white towel. She knew what he wanted and silently approached him, kneeling on the floor. She understood he was accumulating his desires, growing larger like a snowball, and rather than being tormented day after day, it would be better to let the outcome come sooner, perhaps ending this torment. However, this choice was painful. She repeatedly interrogated her soul. He was high above, like the ruler of all things, a deity waiting for a sacrifice. Though she was humble, if there was even a 1 in 10,000 chance, she was willing to exchange her purity for freedom. Her tears still fell, mourning for her purity. Her hands were still bound, the messy white sheets stained with blood. She was like a young doe just shot by a bullet, convulsing and bleeding profusely, her dark eyes filled with both despair for her fate and a thirst for life. He leaned against the headboard, his long fingers pinching a cigar, slowly exhaling smoke rings, his ice blue eyes leisurely watching her, continuing to appreciate her despair and struggle. It had to be admitted that just moments ago, he had indulged in her body, transforming her from a girl into a woman. This subtle, decisive change was exactly what he wanted. For a woman, the most profound memory was undoubtedly the best release of satisfying one's desires. It was power that granted him this glory, the ability to reshape women at will and treat them as playthings. Overall, her performance was good, but this moment came a bit too quickly, not achieving his earlier purpose. He did not intend to delve deeper into this matter. He had not yet considered what to do next. He extinguished the cigar. A woman who had lost her purity was, to him, a pile of rotting flesh. Even if the one who had just possessed her was him, what he wanted was the result. He stood up decisively, opened the second drawer of the cabinet, pulled out a black handgun, skillfully loaded 2 bullets, and chambered a round. The cold muzzle was once again aimed at her. Enhanyi closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. It seemed she had lost the gamble, she had sacrificed her purity and would also lose her life. But death, after all, was also a kind of liberation. At this point, she was not afraid of death, she only feared the struggle before suicide. If he could just shoot her right away, it would be a light relief. Her gaze became erratic, lost in thought. Did humans really have souls? If so, where would the soul go after death? Although her body had been defiled by him, her soul was pure and innocent, surely it would enter heaven after death. Father, Mother, we can only meet again in heaven. He squinted his ice-blue eyes, guessing what she was thinking. Struggling to the end was despair. Such a beautiful girl, ruthlessly torn apart, now facing the end of life. This was truly a tragedy. At this moment, she was particularly beautiful because she was infinitely close to a tragic fate. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.